Welcome to this explainer of one of history's most dramatic and honestly most tragic arcs. Today, we're diving into a profound narrative straight from the historical texts of the Kingdom of Judah. We're going to explore the incredibly fascinating dynamics between Judah's absolute greatest reformer and, in a wild twist of fate, its most wicked king. Really, this is a story about legacy, the fragility of belief, and what actually happens when the deepest values of a generation just vanish. 55 years. Now, in the entire history of the Kingdom of Judah, this was the longest reign of any king. But here's the catch. This was definitely not some golden era of peace and prosperity. No, this was 55 years of unchecked, devastating destruction under a ruler named King Manasseh. For over half a century, the entire nation was just plunged into darkness. And you know what's crazy? This staggering 55-year era of darkness began with the number 12. Manasseh took the throne as a literal boy. He was just 12 years old. I mean, imagine the weight of an entire kingdom placed on the shoulders of a middle schooler. But to really understand how shocking Manasseh's reign actually was, we have to look at the man whose shoes this 12-year-old was expected to fill. Section 1. The Golden Age of Reform. Because before all this darkness, there was some serious light. Manasseh's father was none other than the legendary King Hezekiah. You see, when the massive, seemingly invincible Assyrian Empire was swallowing up literally every nation in its path, Hezekiah heroically defied them. He relied entirely on his faith, and Judah miraculously survived. And that victory, it sparked a massive spiritual revival across the land. Hezekiah didn't just win a war, he completely overhauled the culture with some incredibly bold reforms. First, he repaired the Great Temple in Jerusalem, totally cleaning out the foreign idols that had been hoarded inside. Second, he got proper organized worship back on track with choirs and instruments. Third, he removed the high places. And fourth, he restored the national celebration of Passover. He poured his blood, sweat, and tears into building a unified, faithful nation. Let's actually pause on that third point for a second, because it is absolutely crucial. What were these high places? Well, basically, they were many temples built on mountain peaks. Long before Israel even entered Canaan, these were deeply rooted cultural centers for pagan idol worship. Eradicating them was a monumental, almost impossible achievement. Past kings had tried and totally failed, because these sites were just so embedded in the local culture. But Hezekiah, he finally tore them down. Which brings us to Section 2, the tragic irony of time. History often turns on the absolute smallest increments of time, and the transition between Hezekiah and Manasseh is just a heartbreaking example of this. So earlier in his life, King Hezekiah actually fell deathly ill. The texts tell us he wept, prayed desperately, and miraculously, God granted him an extension on his life. Exactly 15 extra years. It was literally a divine gift of time. But do the tragic math with me here. At year 0, Hezekiah's life is extended. It isn't until year 3 of this extension that his son, Manasseh, is born. And at year 15, right on schedule, Hezekiah dies. This means the great king only had 12 short years with his son. Just 12 years to pass on a lifetime of immense faith, to teach him about the miraculous defeat of Assyria, to instill all those values from the reforms. It simply wasn't enough time. Section 3. The ultimate reversal. Because the moment Hezekiah dies, everything flips. The 12-year-old boy king is suddenly surrounded by reactionary political forces. These were the folks who had hated Hezekiah's strict reforms and had just been waiting in the shadows. They quickly gained the ear of the young, impressionable king and completely undid his father's life's work. It's just a stark, complete 180. Hezekiah destroyed the altars. Manasseh rebuilt them. Hezekiah removed idols from the temple. Manasseh literally brought them right back in, actively defiling the sacred space. Hezekiah risked everything to fight Assyria. Manasseh openly worshipped the Assyrian stars. The son systematically dismantled the exact legacy his father bled to build. And notice that specific mention of sun, moon, and stars worship. This wasn't just random paganism. This was the dominant state religion of the oppressive Assyrian Empire. Do you see the ultimate political and spiritual betrayal here? Manasseh adopted the exact religion of the hostile empire his dad had miraculously repelled. It'd be like the son of a great Revolutionary War hero eagerly putting on the uniform of the enemy the moment he took power. Just wild. And the depths of Manasseh's reign were horrifying. It wasn't just political posturing. The texts report that he sacrificed his own son in the fire to the god Molech.
He embraced the absolute darkest, most violent practices imaginable. On top of that, it's recorded that he filled Jerusalem with the blood of the innocent from one end to the other. Historical traditions even suggest that he martyred the great prophet Isaiah. The Golden Age was dead, and it was replaced by a total nightmare. Section 4, the architectural judgment. Now, for decades, it might have seemed like God was completely silent, but the text reveals terrifying prophetic warnings that show he was actually paying incredibly close attention. We get this chilling, incredibly vivid imagery prophesied against Jerusalem in 2 Kings chapter 21. I will wipe Jerusalem as one wipes a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. That is a stark promise of total destruction. The compounded sins of the nation had finally reached a tipping point, and the cleanup was going to be total. What I find really fascinating here is the brilliant architectural metaphor the prophets use. They speak of God using a measuring line and a plumb line over Jerusalem. You know, a measuring line checks if a foundation is horizontally level. A plumb line checks if a wall is vertically straight. God wasn't being arbitrary in his judgment. He was actively and precisely measuring the nation against his uncompromising standard, exactly like a master builder checking a crumbling wall. And the result of that measurement? Devastating. God declares he will forsake the remnant of his inheritance. This is massive, guys. It goes way beyond just losing a war. It signifies the breaking of a long-standing covenant. Because of generations of accumulated sin culminating in that horrific 55-year reign of Manasseh, God made the heartbreaking decision to abandon the protection of his people. The plumb line showed the structure was just too corrupt to stand. Section 5, the uninherited legacy of faith. So, what does this historical account actually mean for us? Let's pivot powerfully from ancient history to right now. This entire explainer really boils down to the mechanics of spiritual heritage. Think about how these generations played out. Generation 1 is righteous Hezekiah. Generation 2 is his wicked son Manasseh. But if we fast forward just a bit to Generation 4, we find King Josiah, who historians note was one of the most righteous kings in Judah's entire history. The big takeaway here, faith and values do not pass genetically. They aren't just automatically inherited. They can be lost in a single generation, or they can skip generations entirely. It proves just how urgent it is to actively model and teach our deepest values to the next generation. Which leaves us with a final thought to measure our own lives against that plumb line. Are there secret high places you've rebuilt in your own life? Have you let the hard-won values of the past crumble to make way for convenient, compromising habits today? It's a really tough question, but an absolutely essential one if we want to build a legacy that actually lasts. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.